Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Alpine Odyssey. We are going to be pretty much finishing the coaster build today. It's not 100% done. There's still minor details and things we might have to work on during live streams over the next few weeks, but that's okay. It's to a point to where I feel comfortable moving on from this area. So that basically means that after this episode, we'll be transitioning into a new theme set and a whole new section of the park. So I hope you guys are excited for that, and hopefully we get some cool new ideas to go with the new theme. The next new theme, this is just kind of the announcements, I guess you could say, of the episode, is that we are going to be working in an Aztec or Mayan theme, and that's going to be basically next door. We have to think of some sort of transitional element to break the two zones apart, but I think we have something kind of in mind in how that is going to end up working. But that's enough for talking about the future. Let's talk about today. So we are working on the queue line a little bit, and we are going to be jumping around a lot this episode. It took me 2 days to go ahead and finish the detailing up to the point that you guys will get to see. And it's going to be hopefully a beautiful build for you guys. It has some different buildings and some additional things that I didn't think I would get to, but I'm happy that I was able to. And we are going to be introducing a few buildings along the track. This is the first one. This is going to be just a little bit of a shed sticking out that the track goes through across right after the waterfall kind of bridge area. And, it's just a simple wooden structure, and little things like this that might not take much time to build, but they add quick little spots of details and little man-made structures to go along with the very kind of naturalistic terrain-hugging coaster. And having these boxy elements jut out here and there, I think, is a decent design decision. You don't always have to do this. You can, keep your coasters very naturalistic, but, having an open window is a good way to make sure, that your guests can see movement throughout the whole ride. You're not blocking vision from the coaster or anything like that, and I think that is an item that I enjoy doing in my buildings and in restaurants and pretty much everything in Alpine Odyssey. It's all about the interaction from the exterior into the interior, and then being able to see those transitions happen. It's not an easy thing to do. In fact, it's probably one of the more time-consuming things to do in Planet Coaster itself, mainly due to pathing limitations and the way the characters behave and clip through objects. So there's trade-offs to pretty much everything that we do here. Here is one of the, I guess, the larger sections. It's during this large kind of, I don't know what this is really called. Is it called a helix? I think it's called a helix. I'm probably wrong. My terminology when it comes to roller coasters is very poor, so you guys are gonna have to forgive me. I'll probably mispronounce and or misquote the wrong section a lot of the time, but just keep in mind that I suck at these. So we are going to be working on our wooden platform, and this wooden platform is going to be kind of interesting because the track here is going, across, and we want to level this area out and potentially put some more wheat fields down here. We're going to have to eventually build a wooden bridge going across with a crane element, and things like that kind of give you, I guess, more grounding storytelling elements for your scenery. So this is a lower field of grain, and for them to actually get this up to the windmill instead of just carting it, because there is now a roller coaster track in the way. Now in theory, the roller coaster track really doesn't exist, but we're building around it just because we don't want to decapitate our guests. We will be building a carriage kind of support structure going across the track. But until then, we're basically doing this much of the same that you guys have seen on some of the live streams. So we are using the tops of that yellowish pine tree, and that is our wheat crop, you could say. I'm doing air quotes, you guys can't see that, but that's what I am doing. And in the middle here on this one, we're gonna have one little scarecrow. It took a little bit to throw this together. I didn't want to use art shapes just because the material that they are made out of is a little off-putting sometimes. They don't really hold color quite correctly. So we're just using this very small barrel. The top of one of the urns, jugs, kind of scenery piece, just to make it look a little pointy and scary, and then some candy cane arms for stick arms. So, you know, it's a relatively simple detail, but having these small details inside and around these large macro details really helps, I think, tie everything together. And for me, it's kind of the fun thing about building a lot of the times, because you get to kind of just play around and add some things that you might not otherwise think about. And there might be more of that here a bit later in the episode, after a few skips and we get some farther progress. I was thinking about adding some additional elements, so we're adding some rope to it. I wish there was some really small cloth pieces. I think that would have been really cool. And then here, realizing that this cliff face is rather sharp and, it doesn't look like it would be able to support its weight too well, we're adding kind of a short wooden retaining wall structure of some kind just along there, using that wooden kind of pirate scaffolding that you would see. Some larger boulders sticking out, that way it looks like instead of smooth dirt, it has some additional 3D texture coming through, and then you can throw in some shrubs after that. This is kind of how I do the whole area in essence. So you're gonna have these wheat fields surrounded by a fence. Everything around that is going to be a little bit rough and tough due to rocks, and then you kind of backfill those with some light foliage, and you get a nice, I think, landscape effect that, is just very reminiscent of what you might see kind of in a painting or what have you there. Here, we're going to have some more wheat fields. Now, wheat fields are kind of one of the main elements for this whole ride, so we have a lot of these to place, and copy and paste does make this a lot more efficient and a lot more enjoyable than hand placing each one of these trees all the way up the hillside. But there's minor adjustments that need to be made as you go. And like for example, those trees are way too high out of the ground. Realizing that we could fit in some more steps into the terrain, and then you can quickly copy them up and you can create some new fields at your leisure to fill in a lot of these dead spaces. And you have to kind of think about how they're going to get around in these multiple tiers. So on the lower tier there, we're leaving room for a path, and that path is going to connect to this wooden structure. This is the bridge, kind of minding the gap of the coaster track itself. It's going to have a nice kind of wooden ladder stair, very steep staircase going on the interior, just so it's very space efficient. And then it is going to have some nice timber frames. So with this structure, I wanted it to look very kind of thrown together. It's sturdy enough, obviously, to hold its own weight, and it's not like it's falling apart by any means. But I wanted something that looked like a nice kind of rustic wooden shed texture along the sides of that. And the best thing to do to get that is to simply use wooden planks. We don't have a great tile set for things like this in Planet Coaster, so a lot of the times we're kind of stuck making it ourselves. The upper area there, I wanted some, I guess, ventilation. For some reason I thought it might look cool just to allow for some minor airflow to go through this section here. Now the lower bit is going to be slightly walled off. At least 3 of the 4 walls will be contained, and that's just to make sure this little area, it could be a potential storage area, is a little bit more protected from the elements than you might see otherwise. Now, we get to continue work on the spine of the hill. There is a lot of rock placement this episode, and I know it's not probably the most enjoyable thing to watch. In fact, it's not even the most enjoyable thing to really work on in Planet Coaster, but it is, in my opinion, one of the most necessary things people can do to their parks is working the terrain and getting that very clean and very detailed and looked very lived in. That's kind of the challenge of Planet Coaster for me is, and the enjoyment that I get out of it is the little stories that you tell and making those things kind of a completely livable space. So we get some more wheat fields here in the continuing of the textured path up along the hill. Now this is not a super realistic path by any means, but no one's really going to be walking up this. It's really just detail for the coaster to see as you're going up the lift hill. We're also going to be working a little bit on the queue line this episode as well. This building is kind of built off camera for the most part, but we do set up a lot of the main posts, get this kind of thatch covering underway, and I do finish it for the most part off camera, but it's very standard, almost gazebo or terracing effect that you might go here, and the fact that it's kind of this Y shape coming out and then straightening out along the path is an interesting choice, I think, for the overall building design. We'll see how well it works out with the roof. Whenever you're doing things like that with roofing in Planet Coaster, it can get a little complicated, but with some patience, you can pretty much get any shape that you need and desire. Over here, we're pretty much on the right side of the coaster track at this point, and I wanted another barn-like structure because I didn't want everything to be 100% fields. Also, my girlfriend decided to say that I should build some sheeps. So that is what we're going to be doing this episode as well. We're going to be building this nice kind of structure. It's very similar to something, I think it's called a bank barn, to be honest. The lower section is kind of dug into the ground, and the foundation is partially part of the landscape itself. It kind of saves you on materials, and you can use the lower section as a proper barn space as well. The wood paneling is kind of white in color. The lower section is currently purpley red, which I end up changing and fixing a little bit just to make it look more of a naturalistic stone. But you do occasionally, and not occasionally, really a lot of the times, and especially in our park itself, is the first story is generally stone, and then the upper story is wood. That saves on weight. It makes the whole structure a lot more stable, and it also makes it a lot more defensible if that's something that you want in your townhome or in your barn. It's going to have a covered little porch-like section added on just to make it a little bit more asymmetrical. We are going to do a custom roof pattern for the wooden shingles along the roof, and these are time-consuming elements when it comes to Planet Coasters. They're also very part count heavy elements, and unless you have a decent rig like I do, it's not super it's not really a great idea to do things like this for every building like we are and have been for the rest of the series, but for me, it gets the best effect possible for a lot of these roofing pieces, and that's simply due to the base tile set usually isn't versatile enough to get a roof shape such as this, or the tiles on a lot of those roofing elements are kind of plain looking, so you kind of hand tile out yourself. You can get the shadow lines kind of lined up in a good way, color some of the different shingles different versions of itself so that it can be unique and interesting looking rather than a flat color. That's something I need to go back for and fix on the granary. You guys pointed that out the last episode, so I still need to do that. In fact, I think I need to do that with almost every single roof throughout the European section, but it's a minor thing. We'll have to come back to that a bit later. It has a little bit of an overhang, which I didn't really account for when I made the first little pass on on shingles. So we are going back in for that now, randomly coloring it as well. And the other roof section, you know, at first I thought maybe these vertical beams would be supporting the roof a little bit more. And so we're kind of having that there. The other roof section is using the actual wooden tile set from the game itself. So that is kind of interesting just because it has a different color from the main roof, and it's almost added on as an afterthought. And because it is a different texture, it just looks like you know, something people throw together over time. It's something that I enjoy in a lot of my builds to do. We are adding some lower windows. They are kind of closed up. In theory, those windows in my mind would be able to be push out windows, and you just, you know, leave them open with a stick hanging out there, and then that would be pretty much all you need there. The side windows we're going to have to work on as well right after we give this thing a floor. We want to be able to see into the building at least a little bit, so you know, you want to make sure it's just not grass in there, so the rough concrete fills that void quite nicely. And we get to add the white frames. Now I wanted a possible opened upper window here, but I just couldn't get the blocks to essentially do what I wanted it to. If I spent a lot of time, I probably could, but I figured it's just not worth it. It's such a minor thing that we might as well just move on and carry on with the rest of the shape. We're adding the upper window though to be a potential door, and a little kind of small crane-like element hanging out there, just so you can get things up into the side and stored into the attic area of these things. The windows are now in, and you know, you use the storefront kind of block here, and you can get openings, and you can then go ahead use wooden trim to basically make a window frame that is viable. On the back side, we're not doing the open kind of window element, so we actually have that closed, so that's why I kind of backed it with an additional wood type, and that just makes sure it looks like, you know, you could almost slide or shift the wood into some sort of fashion to make it an open window. We are going to fence in the area. We don't want our little sheep to get away. It is a small little plot, and you know, I tried to fence in the lower area a bit. I just didn't really end up liking the looks of it, so we kind of abandoned that. You can see that the terrain isn't really the best here, and also just the shape that I had to work with. I just didn't like the lack of dynamic elements here, so you know, just scrap these fences at that point, and we'll just worry about the left side, and we might come back to the right side when we are working on the next zone. It's kind of up in the air at that point. Here, working on some art shapes, we are going to be making some nice fluffy white sheep, and when you're working with art shapes, it is not the easiest of tasks. Try to get your bulk kind of proportions in large shapes first, so that head, coloring that black, and then everything else keeping white, just so we can kind of see how much space the body is taking up compared to the head itself, and then spend a lot of time trying to find the right piece for the right detail. Sadly, with the legs and hooves of our little sheep, I wanted to potentially find a small enough kind of black piece there just to differentiate, you know, the feet from the legs. Tried the pipe, it just really wasn't going to fit into the compact area that we have here. And this is just kind of one of the things with Planet Coaster, that's there's just not that many super small pieces to choose from. So we kind of have to scrap that little idea here, you know, trying a little piece of wood. It looks like a shoe, so we scrapped that. And readjust the legs, figured, you know, I think this is good enough. I think that's an accurate enough sheep to tell it is a sheep from a distance. Now we are going to have a second variation of the sheep, one with the head up and one with the head down as if it is grazing in its field, and that keeps the variety kind of interesting from above. Also, this is a little bit of an Easter egg. My girlfriend, for some reason, wanted a blue sheep. So I hid that up there near the waterfall area, and we might hide them maybe a little bit here and there in the park, just so you guys can go see if you can find Waldo the sheep, who is out and about in Alpine Odyssey, taking in the views, trying out the different grass in the different areas. At least that is what I'm hoping to do with it. It's our first kind of Easter egg that you might want to look into when the park is done and see if you can find them all yourself. Now we get to backfill a lot of the area with some rocks, create some new steps for some additional fields out here to the right side, and of course color it with some dirt, give it some rock texture and some different colors, introduce some yellows and some of those smaller kind of pebbly rocks that you might get to see kind of when it transitions from the steeper cliff sides into the more classical smooth topsoil of the rest of the plateaus. So copy and paste, of course, here and there just to fill these in rather quickly. Again, on the back side of the mountain, they can be a little less detailed just because the people are really only going to see it when they're up on the coaster, and what I imagine, at least where I would be looking when I'm coming up on the left hill and all that stuff. I'll be looking more towards the European town rather than the left farm field. It's just an overall better picture of the theme park. So, we can get away with a little less detail. And also, you want to add some areas of less and more simple details just to make the other detailed areas stand out a little bit more. If everything was hyper detailed and overly engineered with thousands and thousands of pieces, you almost wouldn't have anywhere to look. Like, you'd be almost overwhelmed by all the choices of, hey, that looks cool, that looks cool, that looks cool. And then you wouldn't really get the nuance that is in a lot of these areas. So it's good to have these dead spaces to balance the whole thing out. Even this bridge that's going across the waterfall is rather simple, just so it doesn't take away from the waterfall itself. It's bulky, it's heavy, it looks like it can hold up its own weight in the car going across it, but it doesn't have any fancy rails. It doesn't have any of that overly engineered kind of planks going down the waterfall kind of cliff face. It's just a nice simplistic wooden bridge. It's basically all you need to hold that cart up, though we do add some side fencing just to make it a little bit more, passenger friendly. So that's it for today's speed build. Let's go into real time and possibly give this thing a ride. Okay, so here we are taking a look at the live section of the episode, and we have a decent looking coaster, I have to say. Now, the coaster might need some final tweaks and changes upon your guys' feedback on this final little episode. And of course, your live streams are probably the best chance of you guys for me to instantly add it into the park. So if you guys want to come hang out in Alpine Odyssey live every Saturday, Sunday, 11:30 Eastern, go ahead and do that. Not Saturday, it's only Sundays. I'm tired. It's almost 1 in the morning, and I just need to get this thing done so I can go to bed and then go to work, and you guys will get to watch that while I'm at work. We have our Gnarler wooden coaster going through this pretty cool countryside. Plenty of weeds and overgrown areas and low-lying shrubs. That way, we're not blocking anything major. We're keeping the trees relatively small. That helps things be readable from a distance, I think. And then you backfill it with some taller trees. And you'll see that effect as we go to the backside of the mountain a little bit more. Here is the queue kind of entrance here, going back into this area. A lot of this we kind of worked on the live stream last weekend, adding plenty of netting over near the tracks just to keep that pretty safe. We have some additional netting going around this bend, and you know, that just keeps people from throwing things on the track, or the people on the train from throwing things off the track onto the people themselves. So a little bit of a safety thing there. We have a nice little cubby of wheat in this area. In fact, this is one of my favorite views of the coaster itself. You can get to see the back side of the windmill, the grain chute going up that, some actual wheat, the netting, and just the rock face itself going on this backside is just really clean and really nice. We have over here on the front side our little shed with some open doors, our little wooden bridge with some loose wooden netting. Nothing too crazy there. We have, even farther onto the right side, our little sheep barn just out here in the countryside. Some of them are grazing, some of them are just hanging around and chilling in their pasture. Now I know they're pretty small, but you know, nothing wrong with some cute small little sheep hanging out with the rest of them. We got the blue sheep up here by the little swing and tree element. We have our waterfall. We have a lot of wheat. We have our windmill. The windmill still needs its inner workings, which we might cover this weekend. And then on the back side, pretty plain, because really the view lines from the coaster are only in specific areas. So you don't have to add a crazy amount of detail. I'm going to, just because I can. And, you know, we aren't only limited to this view or the view on the coaster, so you had to kind of account for all angles a lot of the time here in Planet Coaster, but that's all right by me. We have some more thatch covering going along the queue line itself. This is something that I want to finish on this live stream in this whole area. I don't quite know how I want this to really work in the long run, so I might need your guys' feedback on that. We widened this, by the way. Our actual switch track is wider, and it can actually shift over now, in theory. If that is something you guys were bothered by, it should be okay, at least for now. I know it's not super realistic, but again, I go for more believable over realism. And other than that, I think we're pretty much just ready to give this thing a spin. So we'll come out of this real quick. We will close it down and reopen it. Alright. And give this thing a ride. Here in first person view. No music or anything. I want you guys to hear the in-game sounds. I think that's kind of important. And the trains and other things kind of going on in the background, because it kind of gives the full feel of the ride itself. Okay. So that train took off. We're just kind of waiting for this. Oh, here we go. Okay. So nice gentle curve out the station, and then instantly up the left hill we go. And so, there you have it. That is our wooden coaster. It is not named yet still. In fact, if you guys have any name suggestions down below, go ahead and let me know that. I just want the word wind involved. We have the windmill, you know, it's very countryside, very scenic. So for me, that's an important thing that should be in the title of our ride. Hopefully you guys realize, you know, it's a little bit bumpy, but it's a wooden coaster. So for me, it's not supposed to be the smoothest of rides. And overall, you know, the rating has improved a little bit. I smoothed out some areas, adjusted some things, and we got it up to 6.92 excitement, 4.56 fear, 1.23 nausea, and all that cool stuff. Here is the stats. I'm not going to go ahead and read through them all, but I'm just going to leave them up there for the remainder of the episode so you guys can look through it if you are curious. And I think that is pretty much it for this episode of Alpine Odyssey. Going forward, we'll be moving on into a new section and new builds and new themes. Hopefully you guys will get excited and look forward to that addition to our park. If you guys enjoyed the whole Alpine European Odyssey kind of experience, go ahead and leave a like down below. Leave a comment on what you guys think, and I will see you in the next episode of Planet Coaster.